Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Reclassification webinar, where we will focus on the reclassification process and timetable. Today's speakers include myself, Ravina Barrett. I'm the Reclassification and Self-Medication Team Lead. I am joined by a team of expert assessors, Simone, Amanda, and Basuri, who will introduce themselves shortly. Perhaps we'll start with Basuri.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Basuri Acharya Patel. I'm a pharmaceutical assessor in the self-medication and reclassification team.
And Simone?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Simone Jason Poncha. I'm a pharmaceutical assessor in the reclassification team.
And Amanda?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Amanda Bryan and I'm a pharmaceutical assessor in the reclassification team.
Fantastic, and thank you for joining us this morning. So just before we get started and we show the agenda for you, let me lay some house rules. This webinar will last 90 minutes. Note that the webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording will be sent to all delegates once this is available. The recording will not include the Q&A segment at the end of this session. To make the most of our time, we will answer similar questions in an aggregated manner towards the end. If you want to submit questions, please visit Slido, select Join as a Participant, and enter the code #reclass to submit your questions. Lastly, an event feedback survey will be emailed to you after today's session. Please take a moment to engage with this. So let's show you the agenda for today's work. We will introduce you to big concepts within the reclassification process, the updates to the changes we have made to the process, including considering a simple versus a major reclassification application, followed by navigating your way through the validation checklist, and then thinking about major applications and what their process and timetables looks like, followed by learning outcomes, and we will open up the Q&A segment. So the next slide, please. So we've met, and then let's, again, thank you very much. So the purpose of today's webinar, we aim to equip marketing authorization holders and pharmaceutical professionals with the essential knowledge and tools to navigate the reclassification process effectively. Our session will provide valuable insights into the legal requirements, submission procedures, and best practices for reclassifying medicines from prescription-only legal status to pharmacy or general sales list categories. By the end of this session, you will have a clear understanding of the steps involved in reclassification, the important and necessary documentations that you need to prepare and submit, and the strategic considerations you need to think about for a successful application. This comprehensive overview will empower you to manage the reclassification process with confidence. We also encourage you to take advantage of the opportunity to ask questions throughout the session, which will help you to better understand and implement this process in your own work. So thank you for joining us today, and let's get started. Next slide, please. Now, we have recently published the 2024-25 business plan, and in it, we state our strategic priorities, which are on screen today. One is to maintain public trust through transparency and proactive communication. This webinar fits into this priority. Two, to engage healthcare access to safe and effective medicinal products for the UK public. We do want you to reclassify medicines. We do want to improve access for our patients and the UK public. Three, to deliver scientific and regulatory excellence through strategic partnerships, and that's with people and audiences like yourselves. And four, to become an agency where people flourish alongside a responsive customer service culture. So please do feel free to contact us via customer services. In the next slide, I'll show you the team's current performance. So all applications at the moment are being processed to statutory timelines. We have a rapid case processing time, and we make final decisions quite swiftly. In the next slide, I will introduce the concept of the process changes that we have implemented in this year. But to begin with, if you were to Google a reclassification page or search for it on any search engine, this is the landing page you will land on. And it says, Medicines Reclassify Your Products. If you were to scroll down further down, you would come to another slide with additional information. Now, this segment, this slide, is highlighting very important key links that you should be familiar with, and if not, please engage with this after this session. These are the focus of the documentation we are going to discuss today. And then lastly, but not least, if you were to scroll down a little bit further, you would come across this text. The approved reclassification text in blue is actually a link to an Excel spreadsheet. And this spreadsheet is important for you because it lists all the reclassifications that have been approved from 1991, and this was last updated in September of this year. This list is updated every 6 months. However, historically, the information is presented from 1991 to 2015, with only the first reclassification of a substance being included in this list. Further extensions and wider indications, additional pack sizes or higher strengths have not been included. From 2016 onwards, all major and standard reclassifications are included. And the reclassifications based on another analogous product, also known as a simple application, have not been included. Now, it's crucial to highlight this spreadsheet before we get started, because if you don't know what could be an analogous product in the UK, this spreadsheet should help you get started. Okay, so the next slide, I will discuss with you the updates we have made. One, we have substantially updated our web page, and this was updated in April of this year, succeeding the 2014 version. Similarly, we have updated the reclassification guidance, which was also published in April of this year. And this guidance is supported with 2 additional documents called the validation checklist, which outlines a full list of documents required for a simple or a major reclassification application, and an updated flow diagram so that you can see what the application's journey will be through our system. I will now pass you over to Simone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravina, and good morning, everyone. I will briefly cover the classification of medicines in the UK, what reclassification is, and the scope of reclassification. Next slide. First of all, there are 3 classifications of medicines in the UK: prescription only, pharmacy, and general sale list medicines. Prescription-only medicines must be prescribed by a doctor or authorized healthcare professional and dispensed from a pharmacy or licensed premises. Such medicines will have the letters POM in a box on their labeling. Pharmacy medicines are available from pharmacies, sold under supervision of a pharmacist, and these medicines will have P in a box on their labeling. General sale list medicines can be purchased without pharmacist supervision from a broader range of retail outlets such as supermarkets, petrol stations, and vending machines. It is worth noting that the product information, that is the summary of product characteristics, patient information leaflet, and labeling, will differ depending on the legal status of a medicine, reflecting the conditions of supply of that product. Next slide, please. So what is reclassification? Reclassification is changing the legal status of a medicine from prescription only to pharmacy, or from pharmacy to general sale list medicine. A proposal to change the medicine's classification needs to be supported by good evidence that focuses on risk to the public in changing that classification. The routes of submission for an application can be either a major reclassification or a simple reclassification. A reclassification application cannot be submitted as standard. Next slide, please. There are certain changes to the marketing authorization that are within scope of a reclassification, meaning they're consequential and therefore will be assessed as part of the reclassification application itself. These include product name and pack size. A new product name may be proposed for a reclassified product, which will be assessed in accordance with the MHRA guideline on the naming of medicinal substances, which is available on our website. A change in pack size is acceptable so long as there are no changes in the immediate packaging of the product or any other change which may impact on the quality of the product, for example, stability. Changes which impact on the quality of the product will require a separate variation. Next slide, please. There are changes to the marketing authorization which will fall outside the scope of reclassification. First of all, indications. The proposed indication must have been previously approved on the marketing authorization. Additional or extended indications fall outside the scope of reclassification. Similarly, for posology, the proposed posology must have been previously approved on the marketing authorization. Widening the posology, for example, falls outside of scope. Changes to the pharmacological properties stated in the SMPC, so sections 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3 are outside of scope of reclassification. And addition of own label suppliers and associated changes also fall outside of scope. So any change which falls outside the scope of reclassification will require a separate variation. I will now pass you on to Amanda Bryan, who will cover simple versus major applications.
Thank you, Simone, and good morning, everyone. Next slide, please. So reclassification applications can be submitted as either simple applications or major applications. A simple application is based on a product that has already been reclassified, so there is already an analogous product authorised. The aim of a simple reclassification is to align the product information with the analogous product. So to align the summary of product characteristics, the label and the leaflet with the analogous product. But to know that even though the aim is to align the product information, safety warnings that are already in the SPC should not be removed. So a simple application can be submitted as either a type 1B variation or a type 2 analogous product variation. If it is just the changes to the product information, it can come in as a type 1B. But if in addition to the product information, further assessment of supporting documents is required, it should come in as a type 2 analogous product variation. It's also important to note here that a risk management plan and pharmacy training materials are not required for simple analogous product reclassifications. And it's also important that the name of the analogous product is clearly stated in the application form. So if there is no analogous product, then the application will need to come in as a major reclassification application. And as Simone has said, they cannot be submitted as standard. So if there is no analogous product, it needs to come in as a major application. So then if during assessment it's decided that advice is needed from the Commission of Human Medicines on the reclassification, the application will continue as a major. But if it's decided that no advice is needed from CHM, the application will be downgraded to standard and the fee will be adjusted. And we strongly encourage applicants to seek scientific advice from the MHRA before submitting a major reclassification application. Next slide, please. So this is the definition of an analogous product, which is on our website. So an analogous product has a marketing authorization in the UK and meets all of these criteria. So it has the same active ingredient, route of administration and use as a medicinal product in relation to which the application is made. It also has the same strength or a higher strength, has the same dosage or daily dosage or a higher dosage or daily dosage, and is for sale or supply at the same quantity or a greater quantity as a medicinal product in relation to which the application is made, and it also has the same legal status. Next slide, please. So in considering the suitability of an analogous product, we also take into account the marketing status of the analogous product. So the analogous product should have been on the UK market during the previous 6 months and must not have been removed for reasons of safety, quality, or efficacy. Exceptionally, it may be possible to accept certain products which have not been on the UK market for over 6 months as analogous products, and applicants are advised to contact the MHRA to seek guidance on the eligibility of these products, and we will determine this on a case-by-case basis. Next slide, please. So this slide sets out the simple rule of thumb on deciding which application to submit. So if there is an analogous product, it should come in as a simple reclassification application, which can be submitted as either a type 1B or a type 2 analogous product variation. If there is no analogous product, it will need to come in as a major reclassification application. Then if it's decided that expert advice is needed from the CHM, it will be downgraded. It will continue as a major application, but if it's decided that no advice is needed following full assessment, the application will be downgraded to a standard application. Thank you, everyone. I'll now pass on to my colleague, Bizori.
Thanks, Amanda. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start by covering the validation checklist, and then we will go through the process and timetable of a major reclassification. Next slide, please. Okay, so the validation checklist, this was developed and published on our website earlier this year in April. It's essentially a comprehensive list which outlines all the documents that are needed for a simple or a major reclassification application. We do encourage applicants to use this checklist and to submit it alongside the actual application as well. And that's just to check that all the documents that are needed for a full assessment to take place have been submitted with the application. The purpose is to avoid delays with validation, and as I said, just to ensure that a full assessment can start to take place. The checklist is split into 3 sections. It's all in one form. Part A is for all applications, regardless of whether it's a major or a simple. Part B is applicable for simple reclassifications, and Part C is for major reclassifications only. Next slide, please. So let's explore them in a little bit more detail. So Part A, as I said, this is for all applications. It's essentially the key details of the application. So you'll see there the product name, the marketing authorization number, and who the marketing authorization holder is as well. There's then a tick box section to specify exactly what the legal status change is, and then a free text box underneath just to provide a high-level summary of what the change and what the proposal is. Next slide, please. So Part B is for simple reclassifications only, and as Amanda said, these can be submitted either as a Type 1B or as a Type 2 analogous product reclassification application. So there's a couple of tick boxes there just to specify the type of variation that's being submitted. Now, as we've mentioned, simple reclassifications are based on an analogous product, and we would expect to see what the analogous product is that the applicant is using and what the marketing authorization number is. So this would need to be specified somewhere within your application. We often see this within the cover letter, but if you're submitting this checklist, then this is a good place to include it as well. Now, what you'll see beneath that is a full set of documents that are required for a simple reclassification. So things like the tracked and clean version of the product information, which is the summary of product characteristics, the patient information leaflet, and the labeling, and the mock-ups as well. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, Part C is for major reclassifications only. Now, when you have a look at this checklist, what you'll see is it actually includes all the documents that were included on the previous slide for Part B, but also a set of additional documents as well. And I'll talk about that in just a second. But again, the top section, the boxes that are in blue, that is there to specify the type of variation that is being submitted, in particular if it's combined with an abridged application as well. So the documents that are underneath, they may be applicable, all of them, for some major reclassifications. However, for others, some of them may not be applicable, some may not be needed. And that's why the third column, the last column, which is the comment section, is a very useful place just to add in any comments, any details that might be useful for the assessors, the assessment team to be aware of. So for example, if a particular document has been excluded, some comments can be included there just to explain why that has not been submitted with your application. So like I said, not all of these documents will be applicable for all major reclassifications. For example, if no training materials or no other additional risk minimization measures are being proposed, then obviously those won't be submitted, and that doesn't need to be included as part of your application. So as Ravina said earlier on, this checklist is on our website, and we would advise you to have a look at it and to review it before submitting a reclassification application, and also include it alongside your application as well. It is useful for assessors to see this and to compare it with the documents that have been submitted. Next slide, please. Okay, so that was the reclassification validation checklist. Now I'm going to talk about the process and the timetable for a major reclassification. Next slide, please, thanks. Okay, so this diagram here, it gives a very high level overview of a major reclassification. So just before I start going into this, I would say that our reclassification guidance, which also was published, it was updated and published on our website earlier this year in April, alongside our revised reclassification flow diagram, they provide a lot more detail with respect to the steps shown here. Details such as whether the regulatory clock is switched on or switched off, the day of the timetable, and just detail on exactly what is happening at each of those steps. So I would advise you, I would encourage you that if you haven't already, to review those documents as well. So let's have a look at this diagram. If we look at step 1, this is when the application is received by the MHRA and validation begins. And again, this links back to the validation checklist that I just mentioned, where our colleagues in validation would be checking that all the necessary documents are there. And then when the application is allocated to the assessment team, they also would be checking to make sure all the documents have been submitted. Step 2, this is once validation is complete and the timetable begins. So as soon as validation is complete, that is day 0. That is essentially when the timetable starts. And the assessor or the assessment team will notify the applicant of this via an email. They will notify the applicant when day 0 is and when day 60 is. So the initial assessment of a major reclassification application takes place within 60 days. So either on day 60 or just before day 60 is when you should expect to hear an update from the MHRA assessor. And this is typically in the form of a letter that is sent out, and that takes us to step 3. So once that initial assessment has been completed, a letter would be issued to the applicant, and this is known as an RFI letter, which stands for a request for further information letter. And this essentially includes all the outstanding points, any outstanding issues that still need to be addressed, and that would be consolidated into a letter and issued to the applicant either on or before day 60. Now, once that letter has been sent, the applicant would have 60 days to respond. And that takes us to step 4. So once the applicant submits their RFI response, and once it's sent back to the MHRA assessor, the MHRA assessor will have 30 days to assess the response. At this stage, if the MHRA assessor considers that some of the issues that were raised in the letter have not been satisfactorily addressed, and there is still a greater justification that needs to be provided for some of the points, some of the issues that were raised in the letter, then a second RFI, a second request for further information letter may be issued to the applicant. So that goes back to a loop. So that almost goes back to step 3, where a second letter would be issued. The applicant would have 60 days to respond to this. And once they send their response back in, the MHRA would have 30 days to assess the second RFI response. Now, I must emphasize here that there are a maximum of 2 RFI letters that can be issued to the applicant prior to moving on to the next step of this process. There will be no more than 2 RFI letters issued to the applicant by the MHRA. So once the second RFI response has been assessed, the MHRA assessor or the assessment team will make a decision on whether the application is going to continue as a major or if it is going to be downgraded to a standard. So if no expert advice needs to be sought from the Commission on Human Medicines, the application will be downgraded to a standard application, and that means it will proceed to approval, and that would be at day 120. If, however, the assessor or the assessment team consider that expert advice does need to be sought from the Commission on Human Medicines, the first thing that would take place is that the applicant would be notified of this via a letter sent to them. And that letter would essentially state that the next step in the process is seeking advice from the Commission on Human Medicines, and therefore the application is going to continue as a major reclassification application. So that takes us to step 5, which is the CHM meeting. There may also be advice sought from one of the expert advisory groups as well, but that may not be for all major reclassifications. Now, following the CHM meeting, an advice letter is issued to the applicant. If there is a positive opinion from CHM, that advice letter may include conditions on which the application may be approved. So that essentially may include changes or amendments that need to be made to aspects such as the product information. So changes, for example, to the leaflet or to the labeling. It may include changes to the training materials, if any have been submitted or proposed as part of the reclassification. Now, following this, and once the applicant has made their changes, submitted them to the MHRA, and the MHRA has assessed them and considers that the response is adequate and satisfactory, there may be some optional steps that take place. These include steps such as a public consultation, where the MHRA seeks views from the public on the proposed reclassification. That usually runs for around 3 weeks, and then the MHRA collates all the responses, and if needed, a further letter may be sent to the applicant if additional changes are required. So those are some optional steps that may take place. And again, that would be decided by the assessor or the assessment team. Then they are not applicable for all major reclassifications. If all of those optional steps take place, and based on 2 RFI letters being issued prior to CHM, the application would then proceed to approval at day 225. If, however, none of the optional steps take place, the application would proceed to approval at day 160. If the Commission on Human Medicines, however, provide a negative opinion, this will be outlined in the advice letter that is sent to the applicant, and the applicant will then have 28 days in which they can inform the MHRA that they wish to appeal the decision. And there's further information and detail in our reclassification guidance on how that would happen. And that takes us to step 6, which is the conclusion. And that is where the application would be determined and the final letter would be issued to the applicant as well. You'll see the acronyms as well that I've mentioned at the bottom of that slide. So I'll stop there. I'll hand back to Ravina. That was a high-level overview. Like I said, the further details are in our reclassification guidance, but I will hand back over to Ravina now, just to conclude the first half. Thanks, Ravina.
Thank you so much, Basuri. This brings us to what the learning outcomes are from this webinar. And in the next slide, I will demonstrate that we have updated you on the reclassification process and the changes implemented in 2024, an introduction to the major concepts within reclassification. We have covered the 3 different legal categories of medicines in the UK, and specifically how all of them have an important role within the reclassification process. Amanda has laid out a nice definition of an analogous product for you so that you can submit analogous product applications. And Simone has covered what changes can and cannot be submitted within the different types of reclassification applications. And then, of course, we've looked at all the different types of reclassification applications that are available for you to engage with. Finally, how do you navigate your way through the validation checklist and how to submit a successful application? In the next slide, I will obviously point out that you, as marketing authorization holders, have a very important role, an integral role to play within this process. So how can industry continue to help? 1, please prioritize your response to our request for further information letters, if possible, sooner than 60 days, so that we can make a final decision and progress your application so that you can bring medicines to the market in the UK. 2, to ensure that you submit updated documents by means of an electronic common technical dossier sequence via the MHRA submission portal. And please include in it marked up copy comparisons of the summary of product characteristics, a comparison of the text contained within the patient information leaflet, and against a relative comparison of an equivalent product or analogous product information wherever that applies. And do submit appropriate carton mock-ups. In the 3rd point, very rarely may we ask you documentations outside of the things that we've discussed today, including good manufacturing practice certificates and or qualified person declarations, but this is very rare and not normally expected. Finally, please engage and use the available checklists, which will hopefully support you to complete a right first time submission. So in conclusion, our shared goal is to facilitate safe access to medicines for UK patients and the public. We want to engage in operational efficiency, and this is one of our stated priorities, combined with a program of regulatory reform. But I want to make it absolutely clear here for you is that the intention behind our regulatory reform is not to affect the reclassification process. Our goal is to streamline and improve the regulatory framework, ensuring it remains robust and effective, which is an important ongoing objective that the agency is working towards. Finally, it is with great pleasure that I thank you today for attending. Please feel free to email us at this email address, and thank you very much for your attention today. Have a fabulous day. Thank you. Bye.